Students, welcome back. We will talk about part 2 of lecture number 17. And as you know, I am discussing with you the concept of hierarchical clustering, right. It is very different concept, you may not have heard about it, but you know that such a kind of thing exists in the world. So, dendrogram is what I talked, is a tree like structure which makes all the connections between the similar points possible. It does like a family tree. It shows how individual data points or group data points can be merged. They must have similarity, like father and son, father and daughter, mother and daughter. This kind of similarity is possible. So, here you see I have showing you 6 different points, and there are 6 different points, not 5, and I have labeled as a P, Q, R, S, T, U. Okay. And so, how do you merge them together? Okay. So, you may say PQ is one cluster, is RTU is one cluster, S is another cluster connected, right. That is how it looks like. But one can also say that other way also. I will told you that. Let me remove these connectivities. One can also say that I can have one cluster like this, another cluster like that, right. So, it depends on how do you find similarity. So, if you have connectivity links like this is one cluster, you have connectivity like that, this is another cluster. So, that is what it is, that is how these are done. So, now there are different types of hierarchical clustering. First way of looking at this is basically agglomerative or divisive clustering. Agglomerative is bottom up and divisive is top down approach. Okay. So, what is agglomerative clustering? It is also known as a bottom up approach, because it is just start with every point as one individual cluster, then merge. The structure is more informative than unstructured set of clusters, and clustering algorithm does not require anyone to pre-specify number of clusters. So, bottom up algorithm treats each data as a singleton cluster at the outset, at the beginning, and then successfully agglomerate pairs of clusters, correct. At the bottom, all atoms are individually same, right. Let us say you have iron atoms or copper atoms, at the bottom all atoms are individually same. So, you do not differentiate them at the bottom, but as you go along you can put atoms together so that they are similar and they can form clusters, right. Similarly, in a solution situations, let us say you have a iron and carbon, right. Carbon is a small atom, iron is a big atom, and you have a mixture of all the atoms in one system, right. So, you can actually initially talk about all the atoms at the bottom, each one is one cluster, then you can start putting iron atoms together in one part and carbon atom together in another part. That is what is called bottom up approach. Now, in case of divisive clustering, what do you do? In case of divisive clustering, it is basically known as a top down approach. You have to understand, top down means you have a big thing, you break down in small parts. Bottom up approach means you have a small thing, you simply join them together and form a big thing, right. That is the very layman way of differentiating between agglomerative and divisive clustering. So, in divisive clustering, it does not require you to specify number of clusters, and in this case requires a method of splitting the clusters. So, that means you need to have a algorithm how to split the data. You take all the data together, you split one by one, so that you can actually create different kinds of singleton clusters. And remember that this is done a recursive process, unlike in agglomerative clustering, here you are doing it by recursive process. Okay. So, let us do that. I have shown you very nicely here difference between that. So, first I will talk about agglomerative. So, agglomerative clustering, we are treating each point P, Q, R, S, T as a singleton cluster. Am I clear? Initially. So, then what happens? Then I find P and Q are similar, I put them together. I also find R, S, T, out of that S, T are similar, right. They may be brothers, okay, together of some same parents, that is why, correct. And then I find if I go above, I find R, S, T can also be put together. That can also happen, right. You could have asked me, sir, why did you need to put R, S, T together here? S and T has more similarity than R, right. That is why S and T was put at the beginning as one cluster. Finally, at higher level, when the informations were combined together, you can find RST is there. So, that means what is slowly built up from individual singleton clusters to the many number of clusters. Divisive is exactly opposite. You start with all of them together. First you divide into RST and PQ, then you divide into RPQ and then IST, and finally all of them are divided, right. So, you understand, right. This is how actually hierarchies are actually defined, how these hierarchies are there among the clusters. So, I again describe you in a detailed manner so that you do not forget. In top down approach, you partition data into two groups. What is known as a 2 means, K means mean K groups, 2 means mean 2 groups, recursively cluster each of them. That is what you have done, right. In top down approach, can you go back? In top down approach, it is recursively partition data in 2 groups, you can see that, again 2 groups, again 2 groups, again 2 groups. Each time you are doing in 2 groups, right, 1, then 2, right, let me connect it. Then again this one is 2, this one is also 2, this one is also 2. So, this is called 2 means algorithm, right, in the literature, 2 means algorithm. So, that is very easy to understand. Am I clear? Now, in case of bottom up, you start every data points as singleton clusters and then march. Let us not go back into that. Only thing is that you can say that each one is a one singleton cluster and then you connect them together. So, let us have more discussion on agglomerative clustering. It is basically similar thing what I shown you last step. So, here step 1 you have all of them is single clusters. Steps 2 you put the 2 there B, C and D, you kept A and F separate, right. So, A and F maybe have a different kinds of similarities, that is why you have kept separated, and then you can see D, E can also be put together with F, they have some similarity. When D, F, E are together, their similarities are merged. So, that similarity can then be similar to like F, that is why D, E, F is put together, and finally, you can put B, C, D, E, F together and you can also place A together. That is what is called the way of putting the clusters together. Okay. So, it is most important thing is that we consider each data point as singleton clusters at the outset, then successively agglomerate the pair of clusters until all the clusters are merged into a single clusters that contain all the data. Very simple algorithm. It is basically opposite to decision tree. Decision tree starts with all of them together and recursively divide into different tree like structures. This is the dendrogram of PQRSTU I shown you, and you can clearly see that at the bottom all of them are same, separate clusters. P and Q are connected here. Here T and U are connected, then finally T, U, S are connected, and finally R is connected, and you can also do that. Okay. Here everything will be P, Q, R, S, T, U are there, right. So, that is how the dendrograms are developed. Okay. This is some more example of dendrogram, how it will look like, more complex dendrograms are set. So, this is what is your starting point of any agglomerative clustering. So, what is the workflow in machine learning? Starts with individual points, each point is as a clusters. So, you can define each as a one cluster. You may have 5 data points, consider 5 data points as 5 clusters. Then calculate the distance between the clusters. You understand that distance can be different matrices possible. I told you Euclidean, Manhattan, Minkowski, Malin based different matrices possible. You can calculate distance between the clusters, and then you also initially, since each cluster has one point, this is the distance between the 2 points, right. Can I go back? This is the distance between these two, the distance between these two, right. The distance between these two, this is the distance between these two. You can see they are not same, right, different. So, then merge the close by clusters, identify 2 clusters the smallest distance, right. You can see this is the smallest distance. So, you merge them, this is also little smaller, this is also smaller distance, right, this is a little bit higher. So, you can put them together like that way, sorry. And you can always update this matrix. Every time you are doing this calculation, you can have to update the matrix, recalculate the distance between the new clusters and the remaining clusters, that is what is called. And you can repeat this step and 3 and 4 again and again. So, that is the algorithm which is or workflow which is used in hierarchical algorithm agglomerative clustering. In divisive clustering, let us spend more time on that. It is a top down approach, I told you, and it does not require to specify the clusters. We basically split the data recursively, correct. What is the workflow? You can start with all the points in one cluster, treat the entire data set as a one single cluster, and then split the cluster. So, when you split the cluster, you have to split into smaller clusters. How to decide on that? You can decide on finding the two most dissimilar points in the clusters, two most dissimilar points first, okay, and using them to separate the data. Got it? Two more dissimilar points means two farther apart points from in your whole data points, and then you can repeat this whole process again and again. So, then once you have divided the two more cluster separated points or dissimilar points, you then consider the remaining points, do the similar job again and again and split the points. Stop point each data point is one clusters, okay. That is what is the start. So, this is what is called divisive clustering problem. So, what you have done? You have started with step 1 is exactly opposite to hierarchical. If all the points in A, B, C, D, E, F, then you have B, C, D and A, then D, E, F and B, C, D, and then finally you stop here. At the end, you stop in step 5. That is how we can actually do the divisive clustering. So, how do you calculate the distance? That is also important here. You have 4 different distance parameters. First is the minimum distance. To find the minimum distance between the 2 points. Like here you can see for one cluster 1, I have minimum distance is between 3 and 6. For cluster 2, minimum distance between 5 and 2, right. So, these 2 must be separate clusters. And then once you can make a higher level cluster, that is 3 consisting of both cluster 1 and 2 or points 5, 2, 3, 6. Then finally, you bring point 4 and then you form this cluster what is known as a 4, correct, 4 consisting of 5, 2, 3, 6 and 4, but there is, remember, each one is different distances, and the end you put point 1 also, correct. You can also have calculate the maximum distance principle, find the maximum distance between the 2 points of the clusters to separate them out or split them out. One can also find out group average, that is the average distance between the 2 points of the clusters, which is called group average. You can always calculate distance and take average of that, and then finally you can do the Watts method, which is nothing but similar to 2 clusters based on the increase in the square error when the clusters are merged. We have not talked about error calculations, we will discuss some class later, but you can always calculate it based on the square error when the 2 clusters are merged. What is the square error of distance? So, these are the 4 different distance matrices which can be used to find out this clusters problem in this case. Okay. So, let me also tell you finally, we can start with each data sets or each points in separate clusters and repeatedly join the closest pair of clusters until you form one clusters. Now, history of merging these clusters into tree like things is what is called as a hierarchy. We all know family tree or dendrogram, right? Am I clear? So, that is about the clusters, and in next couple of minutes I will also tell you, when you have. So, let me go back and what all models you have discussed in the first slide, right. So, we have discussed what all model, we have discussed a lot of linear models starting with regression, then we talked about SVM linear model, then we discussed about descent tree, Bayesian concepts, artificial neural network, clusterings. Remember, there are many other models. We also discussed about in the beginning agglomeration of different models, okay. Remember that. So, finally, it is important to know how do you select a particular model for your research or for your data analysis. So, how do you do that? That is what is the job of model selection. Okay. Let me go back to the final slide where you are there. So, how do you select the finally model? Is there any way? Well, it is based on several aspects, okay, very importantly based on several aspects. So, proper selections involves experimenting the different models. You have to always use different models when you are talking about modeling, and you can compare the performances of different models. That is the easiest way. So, if I have to go back to the board and discuss about that. So, what is the first step? You do model selection. Okay. So, in model selection, first step is to use blindly different models. Okay. You can use different models. You may not know the characteristics of your data. So, in that case you use different models, whatever taught to you. But how do you know which one is going to be your best model? So, to that you need to find out, compare them. Compare what? Compare based on performance of the models. So, this is what is the step 1. So, you have to compare different models and find out their performance criteria. So, how do you do that? So, performance is based on 3 important things. One is known as error. How much error each of this model is producing in predicting, correct? That you have to calculate. Second thing, what is known as the precision, how precise predictions are, and third thing, what is called as a recall. Okay. These are 3 parameters or 3 matrices used to determine the performance of a model. Remember this: error, precision, recall. They are related to each other, which we will discuss in the next class how they are related. Okay. And so, that means what? That means for every set of data, whatever you get from literature or what your own data sets, you are going to use different sets of model and compare that. And when you compare that, you calculate error, you can calculate precision, you can calculate recall also. And then you say how these matrices are changing. Remember these 3 aspects. So, before you select a model, first you have to also analyze. Before you do that, we do this comparison. We have to also analyze the problem. You have to analyze the problem which we are handling. Okay. So, that is what is called analysis of the problem. We call it in a machine learning literature. You have to analyze the problem using your own brain or whatever. Okay. Do not use computers to do that. You think about what is the problem it is. You analyze the problem and determine whether it is a regression type. It can be your regression type model or classification model or neural network model, or it is completely clustering based model. Okay. That you need to do it. Okay. First looking at that. So, that means objective is to first analyze the problem, so that I can decide which use. In case of 1, we are not doing that. In case of 1, we are blindly using all the models what is taught to you and then calculate performance. But instead, if you are intelligent, you can analyze the problem, what is the exact problem it is, and then decide which model can be best fitted for this. Okay, remember this. So, another important aspect is that you have to also consider nature of your data. Remember. Why? Because you remember, machine learning depends on data, and if your data is not good quality, even if you use the best model, your predictions may not be good. So, therefore, you have to first look at the nature of data, where from you are getting the data, whether it is authentic data or you have some suspicion, some data points are missing or not. So, that is why you need to do some data pre-processing. You may have some missing value, you may have some some data points which are wrong, outliers. Okay. So, nature of data is very critical, just like analysis of the problem. So, instead of using a blindly any model, it is better to first analyze the problem, then select which model can be used, followed by analyze the nature of the data. Okay. These are all intelligent way of doing machine learning. Okay. Many of you will use this one point number 1, you simply blindly use all model, compare the performances and show the results. That is what I have seen in my classes also, but let us not do that. It is better actually analyze the problem first. What kind of problem is this? What is the physics or the chemistry of the problem? Let me tell you in a very blatant language, and that will tell you whether you can use regression, classification, neural network, clustering, or any other models also, ensemble models also. You can use ensemble models, right? I talked about it, remember that. Ensemble model means mixture of different models one can use. And then subsequently you have to also look at your nature of data. This is also important. Okay. So, hence once you do that, so nature of data also requires some kind of distribution of data also, that we will see in the next lecture, how the data are distributed, distribution of data, how data are correlated. So, these are part of data pre-processing. Okay. Data pre-processing actually tells you all kinds of things how we can pre-process data. So, we will talk a little bit about that, and finally you can, so this is your third step, this is your fourth step. Okay. Model evaluation. Okay. Even if you use 1 or 2 model, you have to evaluate it, how good the match between your prediction and your actual data. Okay. So, that is what it is. It is nothing but the match between prediction and actual data. So, this is, if I consider this as A, which is called blind approach, and B, which is called systematic approach. So, I can always write down this as a blind approach, which many of you use, many students uses that, and this is called systematic approach. Okay. So, systematic approach is better for it to use. Okay. So, we will talk about it, we will take some example and show you how we can analyze the problem, so that we can use certain kind of models. We will also talk about it, how to pre-process data, and finally also talk about model evaluation. Remember, when you do model evaluation, automatically error, performance and recall are going to come into picture. So, these will form next 1 or 2 lectures, and in the later this first portion of this course, and which we will discuss in subsequent lectures also. So, with this let me stop here. We will come back to you with all these discussions in the next. Thank you.